Welcome to this briefing as part of the Robotics Mission that is being supported by the Technology Strategy Board and UKTI. The mission will see the UK's leading robotics and autonomous system startups visit San Diego, Silicon Valley and San Francisco for a week-long program that's specially designed to help them understand the opportunities and the challenges of the robotics and autonomous systems sector in the US. And as I say, make a head full of knowledge and a fistful of business cards and come back ready to expand internationally. It's a packed week, and to help the companies understand the lay of the land, we are joined by the team from UK Trade and Investment and the Science Innovation Network in Los Angeles, who are going to give us a briefing on the robotics sector and some of its tentacles reaching into the ICT and aerospace areas, and some of the services that they can provide to support UK firms that are expanding internationally. So I'm going to hand over to them to introduce themselves and what UKTI can support. Over to you guys.
Great, thank you. Well, my name is Chris McDonald. I'm the Vice Consul for Aerospace in Los Angeles. So my role is primarily to work with companies in the aerospace and defense sector. I also cover some other industries such as food and drink, chemicals, marine, pretty much anything that has to do with advanced manufacturing. In terms of where I kind of work with companies, it's along the entire West Coast, so from California all the way up through Washington and as far east as Arizona. And if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is James Cummings. I'm a colleague of Chris working at the Consulate in LA. And I work primarily with technology companies, so that's both on the software side and on the electronics and communications side, working with US companies in the southwestern states who are looking to expand and grow in the UK, and then supporting British companies who are looking at exploring opportunities in the southwestern US. So we do that in a number of ways, really, on supporting British companies who are coming over here or looking to research the market over here. We can produce reports on what the market looks like in a particular sector over here in the US, where there might be opportunity areas, issues to consider when coming over to California or the West Coast, right through from doing some more bespoke research on potential partners that you might like to engage with if you're exploring opportunities over here in the US, and also working with trade missions, delegations like yourselves, who are coming over to learn more or get some business in the market.
Yeah, and we find those trade missions to be particularly useful for British companies because it allows them to gain access to decision makers and people in the procurement and supply chain. In aerospace, for example, with all the major primes. So these are people that they normally wouldn't have access to on their own. So by paying a small fee, it allows them to come on this mission to explore the market, get an understanding for what's going on in the region, and to meet with some of the major key players. So in the past, those trade missions have been very successful for companies who are prepared, I think, to enter the market and have a unique and competitive offering.
And I think part of that is trying to work out where it might make sense for you to explore opportunities. So whether that is the West Coast, whether it's California, and even within California, for example, where there are different clusters of businesses that it might make sense for you to go to those areas to explore opportunities because it's a big market.
Exactly, it's a very big market, and that's one of the things that we try to sort of help UK companies to understand if they're exploring the market for the first time. You know, if you want to come out and have a meeting program, have a series of meetings with companies, you're not going to be able in 2 or 3 days to hit up Boston, Houston, Chicago, Los Angeles. So oftentimes we'll encourage companies to focus on a small region or a key city and see how they kind of do there in terms of understanding the market and where if they feel like there's opportunities. If not, you know, they can explore somewhere else in the US. But I think taking a small portion of the market as opposed to looking at the market as a whole at first is probably the best approach.
So I had a quick question for you guys. So the company heading out on the mission hopefully will know how to engage with UKTI. My experience has always been as an immense amount of services, but you tend to need to know about them in order to be able to access them. What's the easiest way to engage with you guys or with UKTI in general?
Well, I mean, you can always engage with us out at post, and even in the US, we have about 120 people across the embassy and 8 consulates across the US. So in California, we have a team of about 15 in Los Angeles and a similar sized team in San Francisco. In the UK, there are international trade advisors throughout the UK who focus on specific sectors. So initially, it might be an idea, especially if you haven't had any previous export or international experience, to engage with them, because they will do some early stage work with you to check issues to consider before you look at exporting and look at opportunities in international markets. And they'll do a lot of work with you as well to help you understand which markets worldwide might make sense for you to initially explore. Perhaps there are European markets or it's the US, but they'll do some initial work to get you, to help ensure you're ready for market, so ready to export. And then typically you'll work with us to identify what those opportunities might be and to help make the introductions to those people that can help you grow your business over here in the US.
Brilliant. So it's very exciting. We had the pre-mission event earlier this week, and we have a group of very excited companies relishing the prospect of a week ahead of them. Nick, I wondered if you could introduce yourself and the Science and Innovation Network, and maybe just kick off with a little bit about the robotics sector on the West Coast.
Yeah, hi. So we're really looking forward to having the group come out. So my name is Nick Hooper. I'm part of a parallel organization to UK Trade and Investment. Oh, did we lose you guys? Oh. Are you still here?
Yep.
All right, I'll start over so you can edit that out. So, hi, my name is Nick Hooper. I'm with a parallel organization to UK Trade and Investment known as the Science and Innovation Network. And we complement the work that UKTI does in terms of supporting British presence here in the US. And our focus is a little bit more on kind of research and technology transfer and technology collaboration. So we primarily engage with research groups at universities, at some of the larger companies, and also small companies that are kind of spinning out that are kind of on the bleeding edge of technology. And so I think where we're working on this particular mission is to kind of help facilitate introduction so that companies understand kind of where's the market going, but what's kind of in a fast-moving space like robotics, what's kind of at the leading edge of technology, and how will that affect their business in terms of potential opportunities for new markets, and also what are some maybe technologies that they need to think about that might be disrupting current ways that they're doing business. And so kind of looking at the robotics space, it's definitely one, I think it's a little bit different than some of the traditional markets we work in that it's very cross-cutting and is more of a foundational technology for a number of sectors. So there's opportunities in life sciences, there are opportunities in consumer and ICT type technologies where James is working, and obviously we're all aware of drones and autonomous systems that are flying around, either flying or driving around. There's you might see the Google car driving around when you're up in the Bay Area, and you'll definitely see some UAV companies here in Southern California. So I think the market is kind of quite broad. I think looking at the kind of the breakdown between what you're going to see here in California, I'd say down here in Southern California, I think there's kind of two things that is probably a little more prevalent, especially in San Diego. There's a strong history and a strong aerospace and defense cluster built up around a number of military bases down in San Diego and research units that are associated with the U.S. Navy and Army, et cetera. So a lot of the robotics and autonomous systems are built up around UAVs, and then obviously being at one of the larger ports and right on the ocean, there's a strong marine robotics sector in San Diego. And then the other two in San Diego, I think, that are relevant are work at Qualcomm, which is one of the larger ICT companies in San Diego. I think probably the largest company in San Diego as a whole. Has a number of efforts looking at autonomous systems and kind of smart systems, so to speak, in life sciences and in more consumer applications of robotics. And then there is there's a strong life sciences cluster in San Diego. So there's a bit of work in robotic surgery that we may see on Monday at UC San Diego. But I'd say that the two biggest really are kind of ICT Qualcomm side, where it's looking at kind of the consumer and autonomous systems, and then the UAV market and the marine robotics sector, kind of that's a little more defense, maybe not defense oriented in terms of outlook, but I think in terms of where the technologies have come from. As you go to San Francisco,
does defense still dominate the kind of robotics and autonomous systems landscape in San Diego, or is it broader now?
I'd say it's broader, but I'd say most of those companies have a strong defense and aerospace history, as well as probably a large part of their markets still are defense oriented.
Yeah, I mean, you have obviously the key player down there that everybody knows of is General Atomics. Obviously, they've been involved in the military side, but I think if you look at sort of where the unmanned systems sector is going, it's obviously expanding beyond that traditional defense-based military applications. I mean, for example, if you look at applications for unmanned aerial vehicles, whether it's in oil and gas exploration, search and rescue, crop monitoring, I mean, the applications are becoming commercial and expanding, I think, the opportunities for companies to sort of bring in unique technologies and sort of get into that market. So in terms of San Diego, I think it's still very strongly focused towards the defense side, maybe crossing a bit over into ICT now with cybersecurity as well.
In terms of San Diego's scale, that was one thing I was going to ask. Is everybody on the trip is going to have a strong visual image of LA and the industries around there, or I think we might bust some of those in a minute, and San Francisco and Silicon Valley, but San Diego less so. I was wondering if you could maybe give some insight into the city and the geography, because I'm not sure how many people know the location that well and how big the cluster of industries is down there.
I mean, San Diego is quite close to the border, and downtown San Diego is relatively small. It's a fantastic and quite a large city, really. I mean, where the different clusters are based can be right through from LA down to the county south of LA is Orange County, and south of that is San Diego. And as well as the big military base between San Diego and Orange County, there are a number of different clusters sectored throughout quite a large geographic space. It's about a 2.5-hour drive from Los Angeles down to San Diego. That's on a good traffic day anyway. And you do see Qualcomm, for example, are based slightly outside San Diego. And you've also got other similar firms like Broadcom and a number of other semiconductor companies in San Diego, but also in Orange County as well, which sits between Los Angeles and San Diego. But even in Los Angeles, I think you see opportunities. Consider that some of the more traditional sectors that you might think of in Los Angeles, and even the studios, they're doing a lot, for example, opening innovation centers where they're really looking at opportunities as well. So I think there are opportunities throughout Southern California, but I think in San Diego and Orange County, you do see, a strong ICT cluster, and also other clusters. For example, there's a strong clean tech and renewable energy cluster down there. So I think it is a very strong and progressive area where you do see innovation emerging.
The other thing I would add that's relevant, maybe not as relevant to these companies, but is important to understand in terms of the San Diego economy, is that it's a very strong life science cluster with a number of very prestigious and research institutes that have kind of fed a entrepreneurial cluster around life sciences, all the way from pharma to biotech, and a little bit more recently into mobile health and digital health, and that probably will flow up into Orange County a little bit, which is the area just north of the county of San Diego.
So if we geographically work our way up the coast, I guess the next major spot is going to be is Orange County and LA, and then up quite a long way into Silicon Valley. Maybe Silicon Valley, I think everyone's familiar with the Stanford and that cluster. I wonder if it was maybe worth spending a minute on LA and talking about the aerospace industry there.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think obviously the aerospace and defense industry in Southern California has been strong for a number of decades. I think since the 1990s, when the defense industry, primarily the primes, started consolidating a lot of their efforts, a lot of their supply chain, that the number of employees is definitely drastically.
Sorry, I'm going to ask you on the jargon front, what do you mean by primes?
Okay, so the primes would be companies like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing. So companies that actually produce products or integrated components, which then get delivered to customers, whether that's in the military or commercial side. So tier ones would be ones that make sort of individual components, which then get integrated into the final product. And then you have the lower tier parts of the supply chain, which make individual components or products, which then get integrated into products that are made by tier ones, which then get sold to the prime. So it's kind of like a tiered structure. But in terms of the aerospace and defense industry in the LA area, it's definitely declined. Number of reasons for that. So obviously California is not the most business-friendly state. There's also been geographic clusters of aerospace companies sort of popping up in other parts of the country as well. You have companies that are now internationalizing. So I think there's a number of reasons why that reduction has occurred. But I think there's still sort of that strong sort of legacy of companies that have experience in advanced manufacturing, in robotics, in sort of any applications related to aerospace. So there's still that expertise there, and I think there's still those opportunities, but I think it's just important to recognize it's not as large as it was 2 or 3 decades ago.
The one thing I would add to that, though, is I think, and Chris, you can agree or not agree, maybe you can maybe think if you think it's right, is that I think a lot of the big declines have been in the manufacturing side, and so a lot of the R&D, and especially around satellites and other stuff, has remained here as the kind of engineering talent has kind of stayed, where what they've done in cases is move out manufacturing operations to lower cost areas.
That's correct, yeah. I mean, if you look at a company like Boeing, they're moving a number of R&D jobs down to Southern California. They also have the largest satellite manufacturing facility in the world down in El Segundo. So I think that's correct. There's still a strong R&D base down here, which
I think in the technology sector as well, you're seeing some reshoring as well. And despite the fact that Chris correctly said that California has this reputation as being not the friendliest state from a business perspective, and whilst that's true, it still is a huge economy. Depending on what research you read, it's something like the 9th largest economy in the world, and the UK is something like the 2nd largest employer in California outside of Japan, and the 2nd largest investor. So it still does attract business, and Nick mentioned about the engineers and developers. They still want to come to Los Angeles and California, so there are still big opportunities here, I think.
One thing I think might be interesting that you may come across when you start talking to the people in San Diego is what they're trying to do is look at California in terms of manufacturing as a high-cost state. But a big thing in San Diego that they're looking at is this idea of looking at the San Diego, Northern Mexico, Tijuana community as kind of one large area where you'll be doing some lower-cost manufacturing across the border in San Diego, but you'll still have a number of engineering and design talent in San Diego. And so there's kind of a cross-fertilization as companies and ideas kind of move back and forth across the border. So a good example of that will be 3D Robotics, which I believe you guys will be visiting, not the San Diego, I believe you'll be visiting up in the Bay Area, which has R&D center in Berkeley, up in Northern California. They have engineering and manufacturing in Tijuana, and they have manufacturing in Tijuana, and they have engineering in San Diego, and they're all kind of moving between the 3 centers. So there's kind of this ecosystem that's developing around that, where there's kind of not maybe doing all their manufacturing really far away, but kind of looking at a combination of doing some stuff here in California and then more stuff in Mexico where it's a little bit cheaper as well in terms of manufacturing.
So maybe we could touch on, we've spent a lot of time on Southern California. I wonder if you guys maybe could touch on the differences between Silicon Valley and up to San Francisco and Southern California, and maybe what the companies can expect in the different clusters, and maybe if there's any differences in the type of business that's done in those areas.
I mean, I think in Northern California and the Bay Area and San Francisco, you obviously have that huge technology ecosystem. And I think you'll see, Los Angeles, for example, you're seeing a real startup culture emerging, and you're seeing VCs in Southern California, really engaged with the community down here. So the infrastructure is nothing is quite like Northern California from the tech side and what's happening in Silicon Valley. But sometimes I think that can make it slightly easier in some respects, because it can be easier to network, and there is a huge amount going on here, and there's support for it. And I think that's also the case in San Diego. You know, it's a slightly different environment. So I think it can be I feel, but I'm based in Los Angeles, that it can be slightly easier to do business in some of the major areas
Nothing
down
wrong
here.
with a bit of regional bias. It's always good to stick up for your home turf. That actually brings me to a question. So one of the criticisms we hear about British firms going into New York or going into San Francisco is it's really hard to be heard above the noise, even with our plummy accents. Do you think it's actually easier in Southern California for a British company to make an impact?
I mean, I think it is still very difficult. I think companies that come over here do have to make sure that they dedicate sufficient resource to the US market. They have to make sure that they, you know, have marketing materials, even simple stuff like that, which are designed for a California-specific market, not even a US market, but not even in California, like we're talking about now, there can be big differences between working up north versus down in Southern California. So I don't think it's necessarily easy. I think a company does have to make sure that it really has enough resources and enough funding as well to go into the market. I mean, I think we have seen examples of British technology firms come over to Southern California at a very early stage and be very successful, because I think it is, you know, there is the infrastructure there here to help companies survive.
It's interesting you mentioned like specialist marketing materials for Southern California. What sort of things should they include in their messaging and their materials to make it work for Southern California?
I mean, I don't really think there's, from a marketing perspective, I think there's some common ground in terms of what they need to communicate no matter where they're going in the U.S. market. I don't think it's necessarily specific to Southern California. For me, I think it's a lot of things that James touched on in terms of communicating their capabilities and demonstrating that they have the resources to sort of take on new business and follow through with orders, with technology development, with partnerships, whatever it is they're looking to do over here. I think particularly when they're on the smaller scale, maybe that's we're looking at something like shared space or some kind of sort of support package to get up and running might be the best way to go rather than establishing a full-on office or something of that nature.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I was going to ask you, what's the is there much of an expat kind of network that they can tap into?
You know, there are lots of Brits down here in Southern California, especially in Los Angeles, around, you know, Hollywood and around Santa Monica, and there are networks that they can tap into. You know, not least the British Consulate. We have a fairly big team here in Los Angeles and up in San Francisco. And there are also other groups like the British American Business Council who have certainly pretty strong chapters in LA and Orange County and other British focused networks. But I think that whilst those can be useful, there are better, even more successful networks that they can tap into as well. And I think there are local, either sector-specific networks where people do really come together to discuss the industry. And I think the nature of Southern California means they are constantly looking to innovate. And I think some of the discussions that happen in more focused groups can really lead to some very interesting discussions, because I think in Southern California, perhaps more so than in Northern California, though my colleagues in San Francisco might disagree, but there is a real sense of people wanting to collaborate and work together to drive forward and whatever specific industry they're working in.
Yeah, I'd say that sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, we certainly see the collaboration side in asking for meetings at research institutes and with small startups, and they've been incredibly welcoming to a group that they don't know. So that certainly bodes well. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say on the aerospace and defense side, definitely those industry associations and networks are really key to kind of understanding what the business climate is out here, where the opportunities are. I think those are probably more important if a company is looking to get into the aerospace and defense industry rather than, say, sort of something like the British American Business Council, or focusing more on kind of those expat networks, which may sort of deliver a bit more on the sort of the cultural side and making them feel a bit more close-knit in terms of sort of the connection to the UK. But in terms of actual industry opportunities, I think kind of expanding their network is key.
And I think where UK trade investment can help, and the Science and Innovation Network, is introductions to perhaps advisors who can support whatever a company is looking to do in the US and California, whether that's setting up their own office or perhaps, as Chris mentioned, going into some kind of shared office or maybe even incubation space. Some of those introductions we can make, and we have a good network of people who do focus on specific industries and do have really good networks and contacts into the industry. So some of those introductions, you can use us to help you tap into.
Nick, I wondered if, because I know you've been looking at the area and you're in touch with all the with lots of academic institutions, are there any particular areas of technology, like specifically in the robotics space, that are particularly hot or particularly ripe for the UK firms coming out there that they should keep a beady eye on, and any reading material or publications they should look at to prep for the trip?
Well, I'd say I can give you kind of a brief overview of some of the key institutes, and I can touch on a few of the ones that even outside Southern California that are strong, and then maybe I could maybe discuss a bit more broadly some of the technologies I think are kind of at that industry or the research community is really interested in. So kind of coming south and north, at UC San Diego, we'll be visiting them on Monday, but I think some of the areas where they're doing some interesting work is one, as part of the Scripps Institute for Oceanography, looking at underwater marine robotic systems, so autonomously monitoring activities in the ocean, either doing sampling or looking at the ocean floor or doing mapping, which one of applications in a number of areas that they're using for their kind of research efforts, but they then are developing technologies that can be applied in other areas. They're doing work in robotic surgery, which is, I think, pretty exciting as a way to kind of augment surgical capabilities for reduced scarring and less invasive surgeries. And then they're kind of building on that ICT cluster in San Diego, looking at kind of interactive robotics and kind of building onto kind of machine perception and things like that. I think is a pretty exciting area. Coming north, Caltech is obviously a very strong institution. It has a lot of work in robotics and autonomous systems. And then here in Los Angeles, there's a city, or the city next door, Pasadena, has the Jet Propulsion Lab, which is a NASA center. Unfortunately, won't get the chance to visit them, but they are basically the lead agency for deep space robotic missions for NASA. So if any of the companies are familiar with the Mars Science Lab, and Curiosity and the Mars rovers that were, they're still running, but they're a little bit older. But the Curiosity is the most recent one that's riding around Mars right now, kind of looking for signs of potentially signs of water or the building blocks of life on Mars. So they lead a lot of that effort. So there's a lot of technology development that NASA is using, again, to kind of push their deep space robotic missions. As you work your way north, there's SRI International, which is a spin-out of a private research institute that's a spin-out of Stanford, spun out of Stanford decades ago. Has a very strong robotics cluster and does a lot of work in a number of areas, which you'll see, I believe, later in the week. UC, University of California, Berkeley, has a very strong research center. And then outside of California, there's a number of institutes. If teams have a chance to look around, Carnegie Mellon is one of the kind of the biggest, is a national robotics center, and has a really strong, I'd say, broad-based capability in a number of areas. And obviously, MIT in a number of areas, including around looking at, as part of their media lab, looking at robotics and how they interact with humans. Looking ahead, I think there's a couple areas. There was if you want to do a little bit more reading on kind of where the technology is going and what are some kind of opportunities. There's a document that the U.S. Government put out called the National Robotics Strategy, or National Robotics Initiative. I'm sorry. That was produced in concert, basically, with a number of kind of leading researchers, both in academia and industry, looking at the kind of technologies as a whole and where they think there's opportunities both in business and where are the kind of technology challenges. And I think some of those technology challenges that are kind of ripe to be solved are areas around machine perception. So how does a robot kind of figure its way to ride around, both either if you're, say, a Roomba trying to vacuum the floor, if you're an autonomous vehicle, if you're I don't know, a robot, any type of robot, just, if you're a robot in a factory, how do you kind of interact with with humans. I think that's kind of a strong area. How do robots interact with humanity, that human-computer interface? So anything around artificial intelligence to understand that. Either better sensors to understand vision or better processing of that vision. I think are areas where there's opportunity. And then around better dexterity of manipulators. So robotics systems currently, say if you're in a factory and you're building 10,000 automobiles, they have very specific hands that can manipulate very particular type of activities and can do it quickly again and again and again. But there's nothing like a human hand. There's no good robotic equivalent of a human hand that can do, literally innumerable different types of activities and manipulate itself in a number of ways and grab all kinds of different objects. There's nothing really like that at this point. And so there's
one of our companies is claiming that they have that hand. So we'll see.
So hopefully that problem is now solved. I think that's a real opportunity that I think both in that robotic strategy and on a number of industry events I've kind of attended where there's been a real lack of progress in that area, or I should say slow-going progress.
Okay. What is the key industry event in the US for this sector?
I think it probably depends upon the sector. Again, because robotics kind of cuts across a number of things. So the AUVSI, what's it, the Autonomous Unmanned?
The Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International, called AUVSI, they have an annual conference which rotates around the U.S. Most recently, it was last month in Orlando, Florida, and the Welsh brought a delegation of unmanned systems companies out to that conference. So I'd say if companies are looking in the aerospace defense side, that's sort of the key conference they'll want to attend. Even
on the consumer side, there's the giant consumer electronics show, CES in Las Vegas, which takes place every year, which really is a giant global show. So there are it really depends on what sector you're focusing on, and even within a sector, for example, I know one or two of your companies have a clean tech, come from a clean tech perspective, and there are a number of different clean tech shows around the US, but again, it depends on what they're looking at.
There's a conference called Robo Business, which is focused on specifically on robotics, and then covers kind of how, as robotics as a platform, and how that might apply to a number of different sectors. And that was, I believe, that's every year up in the Bay Area. It was in Santa Clara this past October, and that one does cover kind of broad-based robotics sector. And that one, I think, if you were kind of looking more focused on this particular industry, that might be a good one to attend. It's not quite on the scale of some of these other ones, but it is very focused.
Brilliant. That's a pretty hefty overview, and hopefully some really good insight there. So I've got the awful question is, what are the if I could ask maybe each of you to reflect on what are the do's and what are the don'ts for the companies coming over, particularly the don'ts. I'm intrigued to hear. It's always good to hear where stuff has gone wrong so it can be avoided.
Sure.
You're all looking nervously at each other.
I think some of the do's are, meet lots of people. I think the different stakeholders and organizations and groups, I think they'll meet some really interesting people, and I think they'll all come out because they want to meet potential innovative companies who they can engage with. They're always interested in California, hearing where the opportunities might be, what's coming out of the UK, what's coming out of Europe, where there might be opportunities to work together, to collaborate, to innovate. So I think to meet people and to shake lots of hands and to really follow up and continue to engage with these stakeholders, because they are interested in what you're doing and they have a can-do attitude. They want to do business and they want to innovate. So I think there will be opportunities, but I think it's very much a case of shaking lots of hands, meeting lots of people, and also following up with them and trying to make something happen.
I would say the same thing. I mean, obviously, the companies that are going to be hosting these visits, they wouldn't be meeting with these companies if they didn't have an interest in some way in their technologies or what their offerings are. So one of the key things, I think, particularly in the aerospace and defense sector, where there's a kind of a lot of drive towards cost reduction in the size of the supply chain, is being able to communicate what your unique offering is. Why should they choose your product over, say, 10 or 20 other companies that may have a similar technology or offering here in the U.S.? So being able to communicate very clearly, articulate what your offer is and how it ties into sort of what the company's products and strategy is. That's, I think, one of the key things they need to focus on. And again, as James said, following up with contacts. This is probably not, I wouldn't say once in a lifetime opportunity, but a very infrequent opportunity to get in front of some of these larger companies and some of the stakeholders here. So once you get their business cards, just following up and ensuring that you have that constant line of communication is key to, I think, continuing the conversation once they're back in the UK.
Maybe a don't is, there is an 8-hour time difference between the UK and the West Coast, so make yourself available for when they're at work. I mean, they work hard over here in the US, but in a way, when they call you, when they email you, people expect a fairly prompt response. So I think maybe that's a don't. Just make sure you don't leave it too long to follow up.
That sounds like very good advice. I think I've heard the same thing in New York, where you're expecting the LinkedIn request to come within an hour or so of the meeting. In fact, that was one of the things I was going to ask you as well. Is in New York, you get a no and a yes pretty quickly. Sometimes more abruptly than a British person might expect, and it might even seem a little bit curt and rude. I've heard in California there quite often you'll get a yes, that's really interesting, which translates to I'm never going to call you back, but it was nice having the conversation. Is that your experience? And if it is there a way to get past that?
I wouldn't say that's the case all the time, particularly with these missions. I think a company can't come out here, to be honest, and expect to sign a contract same day. Particularly in the aerospace and defense industry, there needs to be time for the procurement specialist or the supply chain specialist to look at the product offering, see where it fits into their strategy, and it may not be immediate, but there may be an opportunity 1-2 years down the line, and they will keep that information and keep that sort of company and that technology in the back of their minds, or more formally on a system, I'm sure, for monitoring what technologies and products are available. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's a definite yes or definite no, which is partially why I think it's important to continue for the UK companies to continuously follow up and touch base every 3 or 6 months, even if right now the opportunity isn't there. Yeah,
the one thing I was going to add is that I think what might be different for some of these companies is that who haven't worked in aerospace and defense before is that the product cycles are very long. It's not like your cell phone where the one you bought today is out of date tomorrow. Some of these big airplanes and other products are going to be flying for literally decades. So the procurement cycles are really long, and so you have to kind of be ready when you're aware of a new platform that's kind of getting ready to come online. That's when you really want to work hard to get on, because once you're on that, you can have pretty steady business for a long period of time. And I think that's kind of a thing that people don't quite realize, is that the product cycles are really long, so that means that it takes a while to get into the supply chain. But once you do, you can have steady business for quite a number of years.
And I agree with that. And going back to what Chris was saying, which I think also feeds into Nick's point, is that people do network here, and that's really important to how business is done, I think, in California. So if you make contact with 50, 100 people here, if you have something interesting, if you talk to them, if they see something in you, they'll pass that message on to people they might meet in the future, because people do network, they communicate, they talk to each other, they wine and dine each other. So I think just because you're meeting one person, if you don't think that's an immediate fit, his network will most likely include people who you might want to get to know at a later date. So I think that's also something worth bearing in mind.
Brilliant, thank you guys. I think we've probably covered pretty much everything. Is there any last little gems you'd like to add?
Good luck.
That's a good gem, brilliant. Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time out. I'm sure it'll be incredibly useful for the companies that are coming out on the robotics mission, and no doubt for other companies who are looking to explore the opportunities in Southern California. So thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks a lot. Take care.